Betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting or fists. Sometimes it walks into your house, looks you in the eye, and decides you were only useful until something better came along. I raised him with my own hands, fed him with money I earned late at night, defended him when neighbors whispered, and stood behind him when teachers gave up, and the day his real father returned, I learned how invisible a good man can become. I didn't say that out loud back then. I didn't even admit it to myself. I just felt the shift. The silence at the dinner table. The way his eyes stopped meeting mine. The way my place in the room seemed smaller, like a chair quietly removed when no one was looking. He was 26 when this happened. Not a child. A grown man with a job, a car, opinions, and choices. I remind myself of that often, because people love to excuse betrayal by calling it confusion or youth. This wasn't that. This was calculation, wrapped in gratitude that had expired. I met his mother when he was 9. His real father had vanished long before that. No calls. No letters. No birthday cards. Just a name that came up sometimes, usually followed by a sigh and a change of subject. I didn't replace anyone. I filled an empty space that had been cold for years. I never forced him to call me anything. He chose to. One day it just happened. We were fixing a broken cabinet together, my hand steadying the wood while his slipped on the screws, and he laughed, looked at me, and said it without thinking. I remember freezing for half a second, afraid to move, afraid to break the moment. His mother heard it from the hallway and cried quietly so he wouldn't see. Those were honest years. Hard years. Money was tight. Work was long. Life didn't feel cinematic or special. It felt earned. He grew taller. His voice changed. His problems became heavier. I stayed. Every time. I taught him how to drive in an empty parking lot on Sunday mornings. I stayed calm when he panicked. I paid for the damage when he clipped a pole. I didn't shout. I never did. I explained consequences. I showed him how to stand straight when admitting fault. He learned. Or so I thought. When his mother passed, everything changed again. Grief rearranges people. It exposes priorities you didn't know were there. For a while, we leaned on each other. Two men in the same house, both pretending we were fine because someone had to be. That's when the real father came back. Not dramatically. No apology tour. No emotional collapse at the doorstep. Just a phone call. Then a visit. Then a story about how life had been hard, how mistakes were made, how time had passed too quickly. I watched my stepson listen. I watched his face soften. I watched him tilt toward a voice that shared his blood but not his years. I understood more than he thought. Blood has gravity. I didn't fight it. I didn't compete. I stayed respectful. I welcomed the man into my home. I shook his hand. I offered coffee. I even gave them space. That was my first mistake, though I didn't know it yet. The visits became regular. The conversations became private. The laughter became louder when I wasn't in the room. Little things started disappearing. Not objects. Authority. Influence. Presence. He stopped asking my opinion. He stopped telling me about his plans. When I spoke, he nodded the way you do with someone whose turn has passed. One evening, I heard them talking on the porch. They didn't know I was inside with the window cracked. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was just there. You don't owe him anything, the real father said, his voice calm, confident, practiced. He chose to help. That was his choice. There it was. Clean. Simple. Efficient. That sentence rewrote years in a single stroke. It turned sacrifice into a hobby. Loyalty into a favor. Love into a transaction that had already closed. I didn't confront anyone. I've learned that confrontation is often just a gift you give someone who isn't ready to deserve it. Instead, I listened more. I spoke less. Before we continue, tell me something. Which country are you watching this video from right now? Drop it in the comments. Every story feels more real when I know who's listening. The first real cut came a month later. We had agreed, clearly, calmly, in writing, that the house would remain shared until certain legal matters were finalized. I had paid most of the mortgage. I had handled repairs. I had records. I had trust. One afternoon, I came home to changed locks. No note. No call. Just a new metal shine where my key used to fit. I stood there longer than I should have. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I wanted to be absolutely certain that this was real. That this wasn't a misunderstanding. That I wasn't about to embarrass myself by overreacting. My phone buzzed. A message. Short. We need space. Dad thinks it's best. Not, we decided. Not, let's talk. Not even his own words. I didn't reply. That night, I slept in my car. Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I needed to feel the full weight of what had just happened without softening it with comfort. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I planned. You see, quiet people don't lack anger. We lack the need to waste it. I reviewed documents. I reread agreements. I remembered conversations others assumed I'd forgotten. I replayed moments where I had chosen patience over control, and I realized something important. I had built more than a family. I had built leverage. And the man who thought I was finished had no idea how much of his new stability was standing on foundations I still owned. I smiled for the first time in weeks, not because I felt victorious, but because clarity had returned. Sometimes betrayal doesn't end you. Sometimes it finally tells you where to stand. I didn't go back to the house the next day, or the day after that. I let the silence do its work. People who betray you expect reaction. Anger. Begging. Noise. Silence confuses them. It makes them talk to fill the gap, and talking creates mistakes. Instead, I moved into a small furnished place across town. Nothing dramatic. 1 bedroom. Clean. Quiet. I paid month to month. I told no one where I was. I went to work as usual. I arrived early. I left on time. I smiled when spoken to. I listened more than I spoke. That's something age teaches you. When life starts shaking, you don't grab the walls. You watch where the cracks form. My stepson didn't call. Not once. The real father did. Twice. The first time, I let it ring. The second time, I answered. He spoke like a man giving instructions, not like a man seeking understanding. He said things like, "It's better this way," and "You'll land on your feet," and "No hard feelings." He spoke quickly, like someone trying to finish before guilt could interrupt. I thanked him for his honesty. That surprised him. Silence often does. Gratitude disarms people who are prepared for conflict. He hung up unsure whether he had won or just been dismissed. A week later, the paperwork started arriving. Notices. Updates. Small legal shifts disguised as routine mail. That's when I knew they were moving faster than they should have. They thought I was passive. They thought wrong. Years ago, when his mother was sick, I had taken on more responsibility than anyone realized. Bills. Accounts. Maintenance contracts. Taxes. Insurance. All the unglamorous things people ignore until they stop working. I hadn't done it for control. I had done it for stability. But stability leaves fingerprints. I sat at my small kitchen table one night, documents spread neatly, not chaotically. No shaking hands. No clenched jaw. Just calm review. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for truth. Truth always favors the patient. The house wasn't as simple as they believed. Neither were the finances. Neither were the timelines. And definitely not the obligations. I made a single phone call to a man I had helped years ago. Not a lawyer. Not yet. An accountant. Quiet. Precise. The kind of professional who doesn't raise his voice because numbers already do the talking. We met for coffee. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't need to. He asked one question instead. What do you want the outcome to be? That's an important moment in any conflict. If you don't know the answer, someone else will decide for you. I want fairness, I said. And I want to walk away clean. He nodded. Then he asked for documents. Over the next few days, he saw what they hadn't. Overlapping responsibilities. Shared liabilities. Deferred obligations that had been ignored because they were inconvenient. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just organized. Meanwhile, my stepson finally reached out. A text this time. Short. Careful. Can we talk? I didn't answer right away. Not to punish him. To see what came next. An hour later, another message. Dad says you're upset. That word again. Dad. Singular. Decided. I replied with one sentence. Tell him I'm not upset. I'm busy. That was true. The meeting happened without me. Decisions were made assuming my absence meant agreement. That's another common mistake. Silence isn't consent. It's preparation. 2 weeks later, the first letter arrived at the house. Formal. Neutral. Unemotional. It didn't accuse. It clarified. Responsibilities. Contributions. Timelines. The real father called me immediately this time. His tone had changed. He asked why I was doing this. He asked if I was trying to hurt them. He asked if money mattered more than family. I listened. Then I answered slowly. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm letting things be seen. That's the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge pushes. Justice removes the cover and steps back. My stepson showed up at my place unannounced the next day. I knew it was him before I opened the door. You don't forget the weight of someone you raised. He looked older than he had a month earlier. Not wiser. Just heavier. His confidence had cracks in it now. He tried to hug me. I stepped aside, not harshly. Just honestly. We sat. He talked. He explained. He blamed confusion. Loyalty. Pressure. He said he didn't mean for things to go this far. I let him finish. Then I asked one question. When you changed the locks, what did you think would happen to me that night? He didn't answer. I waited. I didn't think, he said finally. That was the most honest thing he'd said in weeks. I nodded. I told him I believed him. Then I told him something else. Not thinking doesn't erase consequences. It only explains them. He looked at me like he wanted reassurance. I didn't give it. Not because I was cruel. Because reassurance too early teaches nothing. He left quieter than he arrived. The next phase unfolded without drama. Payments paused. Services questioned. Deadlines revisited. Nothing illegal. Nothing aggressive. Just accuracy replacing assumption. Stress does interesting things to people who rely on shortcuts. The real father started pushing. Making calls. Demanding speed. His confidence cracked when the system didn't bend. He had expected confrontation. He got procedure. That's when he made his second mistake. He tried to rush a resolution. Pressure reveals intent. Intent reveals character. By the time they realized the ground under them wasn't solid, it was already too late to pretend nothing was wrong. I watched from a distance, not with pleasure, but with a strange calm. This wasn't about winning. It was about balance restoring itself. Some nights, I still felt the sting. Betrayal doesn't disappear just because justice shows up. It lingers. It asks questions at inconvenient hours. But I reminded myself of something important. I had not lost my role. They had simply misunderstood it. And misunderstandings, when corrected properly, teach lessons no lecture ever could. The turning hadn't arrived yet. But it was close enough now that I could feel it. By the time they understood the situation was no longer under their control, the damage had already started showing in places they didn't expect. It began quietly. A notice here. A delay there. Nothing dramatic enough to panic over at first. Just enough friction to slow momentum. People who rely on confidence more than structure hate friction. It makes them impatient. And impatience makes them careless. The real father called again. This time, he didn't hide the frustration. He said things like, "This is unnecessary," and "We can settle this privately." He said my name more often, like repetition might soften my resolve. He suggested meeting in person. He suggested compromise. What he really wanted was speed. I told him I was open to clarity, not urgency. That ended the call. My stepson stopped messaging altogether after that. Silence from him felt different than silence from me. Mine was chosen. His was avoidance. I thought about him more than I wanted to admit. Not with anger. With disappointment. That's heavier. Anger burns out. Disappointment settles in and rearranges your expectations permanently. I remembered the first job he ever had. How nervous he was. How he asked me what to say if his boss criticized him. I remembered telling him, "Listen first. Respond second." He had nodded like it was simple wisdom. Now he was living with someone who spoke over problems instead of through them. That contrast mattered. I stayed disciplined. I didn't gossip. I didn't explain myself to mutual friends. I didn't defend my silence. People notice restraint. They also talk when they sense imbalance. Word traveled back to me slowly. Fragments. Hints. The house was costing more than expected. Repairs they didn't plan for. Fees they didn't understand. A structure they assumed was free revealing its price. None of this was revenge. It was reality catching up. One afternoon, I received a request for mediation. Formal. Neutral language again. The kind designed to look cooperative while reclaiming control. I agreed. We met in a small office with neutral walls and a clock that ticked loudly when no one spoke. The real father arrived early. My stepson arrived late. That told me more than any statement could. They both looked at me differently now. Less dismissive. More measured. The mediator spoke first. Explained process. Set expectations. Asked what outcome we each wanted. The real father spoke quickly. He framed things as misunderstandings. He emphasized family. He implied I was holding on when it would be healthier to let go. When it was my turn, I spoke slowly. I didn't accuse. I didn't narrate pain. I stated facts. Contributions. Agreements. Responsibilities. Timelines. I didn't say how the lockout made me feel. I said what it violated. That's another lesson age teaches you. Feelings fade. Records don't. The mediator nodded more during my turn than during his. My stepson stared at the table. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend. He listened. At one point, he looked up at me. Not defiantly. Searching. I held his gaze without softness or hardness. Just truth. When the session ended, no decisions were finalized. But momentum shifted. Outside, my stepson asked if we could talk alone. The real father hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Control doesn't like privacy. We walked a short distance away. He spoke first. "I didn't think it would get like this," he said. I nodded. "I know," I replied. That answer confused him. He had expected agreement or argument. Instead, he got understanding without absolution. "I thought you'd just step back," he continued. "You always did." I looked at him then. Really looked. "Stepping back isn't the same as disappearing," I said. He swallowed. His shoulders dropped slightly. A physical reaction to realizing the difference. "I didn't mean to replace you," he said quietly. "I wasn't replaced," I answered. "I was discarded. There's a difference." He didn't argue that. We stood there in silence. Not hostile. Just honest. "I don't hate you," I said finally. But I won't protect you from the consequences of choices you were old enough to make. That was the first time his eyes filled. Not with self-pity. With recognition. We parted without resolution. Weeks passed. Processes continued. Numbers settled into place. Obligations became unavoidable. The real father's tone changed again. Less demanding. More cautious. He started using phrases like shared responsibility and mutual understanding. Language adapts when leverage shifts. One evening, I received a message from my stepson. Longer this time. Thoughtful. No mention of his father. Just his own words. He apologized. Not broadly. Specifically. For the locks. For the assumption. For the silence. Specific apologies matter. They show thought. I didn't reply immediately. When I did, I kept it simple. I accept your apology. Healing takes time. Accountability takes action. That was enough. The house situation resolved not with victory, but with balance. Assets redistributed. Responsibilities acknowledged. Nothing dramatic. Nothing humiliating. Just fair. I moved on quietly. New routines. New focus. Less noise. My stepson moved too. Not far. But enough to feel the difference between support and dependence. We speak now. Occasionally. Carefully. Like two men rebuilding a bridge without pretending it never collapsed. The real father faded again. Not angrily. Just naturally. People who rely on others' structures rarely stay when maintenance is required. I don't celebrate that. I observe it. Looking back, I see the truth clearly. I didn't lose a son. I released an illusion. And in doing so, I regained something far more valuable than loyalty forced by history. I regained my peace. Sometimes silence is the best revenge. They thought the story was over when the paperwork settled, but betrayal rarely ends where people expect. It usually waits until everyone relaxes before revealing what it really took. I didn't feel relief when things balanced out. I felt exposure. When you build your life around others for too long, even justice leaves you standing in unfamiliar space, unsure which parts of yourself were truly yours. I moved forward anyway. Part of that meant revisiting years I had ignored. Work I had postponed. Relationships I had kept at arm's length because home demanded all my attention. I wasn't lonely, but I wasn't whole either. That's something no one warns you about. When a role ends suddenly, you don't just lose people. You lose purpose. I had been the stable one. The reliable one. The man who filled gaps quietly. Without that role, silence felt different. Not confusing. Just loud. I focused on routine. Early mornings. Long walks. Simple meals. I kept my phone face down more often. Not out of bitterness, but to reclaim time I had given away without noticing. That's when the call came. Not from my stepson. Not from the real father. From work. They said my name the way people do when they've already decided something. Polite. Careful. Distant. They wanted a meeting. I didn't panic. I didn't speculate. I showed up early, same as always. 3 people were there. None of them surprised me. Familiar faces. Familiar expressions. The kind that pretend concern while rehearsing justification. They talked about restructuring. About alignment. About future direction. I listened. Then they said something that felt almost rehearsed. We feel you might not be the right fit going forward. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I understood the language. I had spoken it myself in other contexts. It wasn't personal, they implied. It was strategic. I asked one question. Is this about performance? They avoided the word. That was answer enough. You see, while my personal life had been unraveling, my professional one had been quietly stabilizing in ways others didn't notice. I had been careful. Methodical. I documented everything. Not out of fear but habit. Years ago, someone had told me, if you do the work, keep the proof. I never forgot that. They offered a package. Reasonable on paper. Designed to encourage quick agreement. I asked for time. They exchanged looks. Not annoyed. Relieved. People relax when they think delay means surrender. I walked out calmly. That evening, my stepson called. Unexpected. His voice sounded different. Less guarded. I heard about your job, he said. That stopped me for a moment. How did you hear? I asked. He hesitated. My father knows someone there. There it was again. Invisible threads. Connections crossing lines quietly. I thanked him for telling me. He asked if I was okay. I am, I said. And I was. Not because nothing hurt, but because nothing surprised me anymore. That night, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Performance reviews. Emails. Approvals. Commendations. Quiet evidence. I wasn't angry. Anger rushes. I was steady. I scheduled my own meeting. This time, I didn't go alone. I brought clarity. The conversation shifted quickly. Tone changed. Language softened. The offer adjusted. I didn't demand anything. I didn't threaten. I asked them to explain their decision in writing. That's when confidence dissolves. A week later, the position remained. So did I. Quietly. Without apology. When my stepson found out, he didn't comment. He didn't need to. Some lessons don't require dialogue. I realized something important then. Betrayal doesn't come in isolated moments. It arrives in waves, testing whether you've learned or whether you're still hoping things will return to what they were. I wasn't. I was moving forward. Carefully. Deliberately. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. The days after that meeting felt different. Not lighter, just clearer, like a fog lifting without revealing anything pleasant underneath, only truth. At work, people behaved carefully around me. Conversations lowered when I entered rooms. Smiles lasted half a second too long. I didn't take it personally. When systems fail quietly, everyone pretends not to notice the repair. I focused on doing my job the same way I always had. No proving. No resentment. Consistency is unsettling to people who expect reaction. At home, the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt earned. I cooked for myself. I read again. I slept without listening for someone else's footsteps. Independence, I learned, has a sound. It's soft, but it's honest. My stepson began reaching out more regularly. Not often. Not intrusively. Small check-ins. Questions about work. Casual mentions of his own life. He never mentioned his father anymore. That omission mattered. One evening, he asked if we could meet for coffee. Neutral ground. No history attached to chairs or walls. I agreed. He arrived early this time. That alone told me he was trying. He looked healthier. Tired, but grounded. Responsibility does that. It strips illusions quickly. We talked about simple things at first. Weather. Traffic. Work. Then he paused. I didn't realize how much you handled, he said. Until I had to start doing it myself. I nodded. Recognition without defensiveness is rare. I let it sit. He doesn't stay long, he added, meaning his real father. He's always busy. I didn't respond. He talks a lot, my stepson continued, but when things get complicated, he disappears. Still, I said nothing. Silence allows people to finish their own thoughts. I think I mistook confidence for strength, he said finally. That sentence landed heavier than any apology. It showed reflection. Growth. Pain earned honestly. I'm not asking to go back, he said quickly, sensing the direction his words could go. I just wanted you to know I see it now. I looked at him then, not as a child, not as someone who owed me, but as a man learning consequences in real time. Seeing it is the beginning, I said. Living with it is the work. He accepted that without argument. After that, things shifted slowly. Not dramatically. Trust doesn't return with gestures. It returns with patterns. At work, a new project landed on my desk. Challenging. Under-resourced. Risky. The kind people avoid unless they have nothing to prove. I took it. Not for recognition. For alignment. It fit my skills. It needed patience. As I built it piece by piece, I realized something important. I had spent years supporting other people's growth while postponing my own. That ends quietly, not with declarations, but with decisions. Meanwhile, pressure mounted elsewhere. The real father's influence faded further. Bills didn't negotiate. Time didn't wait. Charm didn't substitute follow-through. I heard through others that he blamed me. That didn't surprise me. Accountability often looks like hostility to people who avoid it. He reached out once more. A message this time. Polite. Guarded. He suggested a conversation to clear the air. I declined. Not angrily. Simply. Some conversations are invitations back into chaos. Wisdom learns which doors to leave closed. My stepson understood. He didn't argue. He didn't ask me to reconsider. That told me something had changed. One afternoon, he asked for advice. Not permission. Advice. It was about a decision at work. A moral gray area. A shortcut that promised speed at the cost of integrity. I listened. Then I said something I had learned too late myself. Shortcuts don't save time. They borrow it. With interest. He smiled faintly. He didn't choose the shortcut. Weeks later, he thanked me. Not verbally. Through action. He handled something difficult correctly, even when it cost him. I didn't praise him. Growth doesn't need applause. It needs reinforcement through trust. The project at work succeeded quietly. No announcements. No spotlight. Just results that couldn't be ignored. My role stabilized further. Not because I fought for it, but because I became indispensable again, on my terms. I realized then that betrayal had forced me into clarity I had been avoiding. I stopped living as a role. I started living as myself. And in that space, forgiveness didn't feel like surrender. It felt like freedom, arriving without ceremony, exactly when it was ready. Stability has a strange effect once you stop chasing it. It shows up quietly and waits to see if you'll panic and ruin it. I didn't. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into something that finally felt like forward motion instead of recovery. I wasn't rebuilding what I had lost. I was building something that had never existed before. A life that didn't require constant justification. At work, people stopped watching me for reaction. They started coming to me for direction. Not because I asserted authority, but because I didn't compete for it. Calm attracts gravity. One afternoon, a younger colleague asked me how I stayed so composed when things went wrong. He expected a clever answer. Something motivational. I told him the truth. Because reacting feels powerful in the moment, but it makes you predictable. He laughed, not fully understanding yet. He would. Time teaches better than advice. My stepson continued reaching out. Not for help. For connection. There's a difference. Help assumes hierarchy. Connection assumes equality. That shift mattered. We didn't revisit the past often. When we did, it wasn't to reopen wounds, but to understand patterns. He admitted something one evening that stayed with me. I thought loyalty was about choosing sides, he said. I didn't know it was about choosing values. That sentence told me more than any apology ever could. The real father faded completely after that. No calls. No messages. Just absence. Not dramatic. Just consistent. The way some people exit once their usefulness expires. I didn't celebrate it. I noted it. Absence teaches its own lesson. One night, I found myself thinking about his mother. Not with sadness this time. With gratitude. I realized she had trusted me not just with her child, but with my own judgment. That trust had been tested. It had held. I wrote her a letter that night. I didn't send it anywhere. I didn't need to. Some words are meant only to be released, not delivered. I told her I had done my best. I told her I had learned. I told her I was at peace. When I finished, I slept deeply. No dreams. Just rest. A few months later, my stepson invited me to dinner. His place. Simple. No ceremony. I arrived on time. He cooked. Nothing impressive. Honest food. Earned effort. We talked like two men who had survived something separately and found their way back without pretending nothing happened. At one point, he raised a glass. To second chances, he said. I corrected him gently. To earned ones. He smiled and nodded. He understood. As I drove home that night, I realized something that would have shocked the man I was a year earlier. I no longer needed closure. Closure is a concept for people waiting for permission to move on. I had already moved. Betrayal had forced my hand. Silence had sharpened my focus. Patience had done the rest. I didn't win. I learned. And that lesson settled into my life quietly, the way real wisdom always does, without applause, without witnesses, and without regret. Sometimes silence isn't just the best revenge. The calm I had found wasn't fragile anymore. It had weight, routine, backbone. I woke up early without forcing myself. I worked without distraction. I slept without replaying conversations that no longer mattered. That alone told me I had crossed into a different phase. But peace doesn't mean isolation. It means choosing who earns access. At work, the successful project had changed how people approached me. Not warmly. Respectfully. That's the difference between admiration and recognition. Admiration fades. Recognition stays. One afternoon, I was called into a meeting again. Different room. Different faces. Same organization. The tone this time wasn't cautious. It was curious. They wanted to expand the project. More responsibility. Broader authority. Quietly. I listened. Asked questions. Took notes. I didn't say yes immediately. That confused them. When you've been underestimated long enough, people assume any offer is a gift. They forget some men have learned to choose. I told them I would consider it. That night, my stepson called. His voice carried tension. Not panic. Pressure. They're struggling, he said, meaning the house situation he was still disentangling himself from financially. Things are heavier than expected. I didn't interrupt. He wants me to ask you for help, he added. Not money. Advice. Connections. There it was. The request I had known would come eventually. I stayed silent longer than was comfortable. Not to punish him. To give space for reflection. And what do you want? I asked finally. He hesitated, then answered honestly. I want to handle this without leaning on you the way I did before. But I don't want to repeat mistakes either. That was growth. Real growth. The kind that doesn't ask for rescue. I can listen, I said. I won't intervene. He accepted that. We talked through options. Risks. Boundaries. I didn't solve anything for him. I helped him think. When the call ended, I felt something unexpected. Pride. Not possessive. Not nostalgic. Quiet pride in watching a man choose responsibility instead of escape. Meanwhile, pressure built elsewhere. The real father resurfaced. Not directly. Through noise. Rumors. Complaints. Stories shared with mutual acquaintances. A narrative painting me as controlling. Unforgiving. Cold. I heard about it from someone who meant well. I thanked them and did nothing. Reputation built on restraint doesn't collapse under gossip. It strengthens. Because people compare stories with behavior. And behavior doesn't lie. At work, I accepted the expanded role, but on my terms. Clear scope. Written expectations. Defined authority. They agreed quickly. That alone told me how much leverage had shifted. With more authority came visibility. With visibility came resistance. Not from above. From peers. Subtle undermining. Delayed responses. Passive comments in meetings. The usual signs of insecurity adjusting to hierarchy. I recognized it instantly. Power games wear the same clothes everywhere. I didn't confront them. I documented. I asked clarifying questions publicly and followed up privately. I credited others openly and corrected errors quietly. Slowly, the resistance lost momentum. People either aligned or exposed themselves. That's another truth I've learned. You don't defeat opposition by crushing it. You defeat it by making it obvious. During this time, my stepson faced his first real failure since stepping out from under protection. A decision backfired. Not disastrously, but noticeably. He called me that night. Not for reassurance. For grounding. I did everything right, he said. And it still went wrong. I smiled to myself. Then you learned something, I said. If doing everything right guaranteed success, wisdom wouldn't be necessary. He laughed softly. Tired. Honest. That conversation stayed with me. Because it mirrored something else happening quietly. The real father made a move. He attempted to force a resolution through pressure, not process. Raised voices. Threats disguised as urgency. He reached out to people with influence, trying to bypass systems. That's when the structure I had quietly reinforced did its work. Requests stalled. Calls went unanswered. Processes demanded documentation he couldn't provide. Pressure collapsed inward. I heard about the outburst later. The accusations. The blame. My name used sharply. I didn't respond. Silence isn't avoidance when nothing needs correcting. One evening, I sat alone with a glass of water, thinking about how far things had shifted. Once, I had been the background. The support. The invisible constant. Now, I was centered. Not loudly. Not proudly. Just accurately. The difference mattered. But part 3 wasn't about triumph. It was about tension. Because growth doesn't happen in clean lines. It happens when old patterns test new boundaries. And one of those tests was coming. It arrived as an invitation. My stepson asked me to attend a small gathering. Friends. Colleagues. People from his current life. The real father would be there. He didn't frame it as reconciliation. He framed it as reality. I don't want to avoid, he said. But I don't want chaos either. I respected that. I agreed. Not because I wanted closure. Because I trusted my calm. The evening was controlled. Polite. Surface-level conversation. No confrontations. No performances. The real father watched me from across the room. His eyes carried something between resentment and curiosity. When he approached, he didn't apologize. He didn't accuse. He said, "You look well." "I am," I replied. That was all. No handshake. No explanation. He nodded slowly, like someone realizing the ground had changed while he wasn't paying attention. Later, my stepson thanked me for coming. "You didn't make it harder," he said. "I didn't need to," I answered. Driving home that night, I reflected on something important. The goal of moral revenge isn't to humiliate. It's to outgrow. And outgrowing someone quietly is the most disorienting consequence they'll ever face. The tension didn't announce itself loudly after that night. It settled into the background like a low-pressure system, invisible but shaping everything around it. I could feel it in small interactions. Pauses that lasted a second too long. Words chosen too carefully. People measuring me now instead of assuming they knew me. That kind of shift always follows quiet power. It unsettles those who were comfortable when you were predictable. At work, my expanded role brought new responsibilities that most people avoid because they expose your thinking. Strategy meetings. Long-term planning. Decisions that couldn't be blamed on urgency or chaos. I approached them the same way I had approached everything else lately. Slowly. Cleanly. With intention. I stopped explaining myself. That alone changed how people responded. One morning, a senior colleague tried to corner me after a meeting. He smiled the way people do when they want to sound supportive while probing for weakness. "You've changed," he said. "You used to be more flexible." I looked at him for a moment, not defensively, just curiously. "I still am," I said. "Just not about principles." He didn't smile after that. The project expanded again. More eyes. More opinions. More resistance. But also more opportunity to see who worked from substance and who worked from noise. I kept notes. Not on people's mistakes. On their patterns. Who avoided accountability. Who stepped up quietly. Who talked more than they delivered. Patterns never lie. They repeat until acknowledged. Meanwhile, my stepson's life grew heavier in ways that had nothing to do with me. Work pressure. Financial responsibility. Emotional distance from the man he had once idealized. He didn't complain. That's how I knew it was serious. One evening, he called me and didn't speak right away. Just breathed. I let the silence hold. "I think I understand something now," he said finally. He never wanted to be a father. He wanted to be admired. I closed my eyes for a moment. "That's a hard realization," I said. "But it's an honest one." "He keeps asking why things aren't easier," my stepson continued. "Why people don't just help him. Why nothing sticks." I didn't comment. "He says you poison things against him." There it was. I exhaled slowly. "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think he poisoned himself," he said. "By refusing to learn." That was it. That was the moment I knew the cycle had broken. Not because of anything I had done to punish or prove, but because someone else had seen clearly without needing me to point. At work, resistance hardened into something more deliberate. A group began questioning decisions indirectly, reframing outcomes, creating narratives that implied I was overreaching. I didn't counter with argument. I countered with process. Every decision documented. Every rationale shared transparently. Every dissent invited, not silenced. That's the thing insecure people fear most. Open systems. They thrive in confusion. The pressure shifted. Suddenly, those who criticized privately hesitated to speak publicly. Suddenly, silence worked in my favor. One afternoon, I was pulled aside by someone I hadn't expected. A woman who had watched everything from a distance. Sharp. Reserved. Trusted by everyone. "You're not here to dominate," she said. "You're here to stabilize." I nodded. "That's why this works," she added. That conversation stayed with me. It clarified something I hadn't articulated yet. I wasn't fighting systems anymore. I was correcting imbalance. The real father tried again, indirectly. He reached out to someone connected to my work, attempting to frame me as rigid, unforgiving, difficult. That attempt collapsed quickly. Not because people defended me loudly, but because it didn't align with how I operated. Consistency is the enemy of manipulation. I received a message from him shortly after. Long, emotional. Defensive. It spoke of misunderstandings and intentions. It asked for acknowledgement. I read it once. Then I archived it. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Some messages aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to be outgrown. My stepson invited me over again, this time with a different energy. Not cautious. Grounded. He had made a decision. A difficult one. He had drawn boundaries. Financial. Emotional. Clear. He didn't take it well, he said. But I didn't explain myself. I smiled. "You're learning," I said. He nodded, then hesitated. "I'm scared," he admitted. Not of failing, of becoming bitter. That question mattered more than he knew. "Bitterness comes from entitlement," I said. "Gratitude prevents it." He considered that quietly. At work, a final test arrived disguised as urgency. A proposal pushed forward without proper review. Pressure applied from multiple directions. They expected me to approve it quickly. I didn't. I slowed it down. That decision saved the company from a costly mistake. It also exposed those who had pushed for speed over substance. There was fallout. Quiet reassignment. Subtle consequences. Nothing dramatic. Just correction. One evening, as I sat alone, I realized something had shifted again. The tension that once followed me had changed direction. It wasn't pressing against me anymore. It was moving away. The people who thrived on chaos lost interest. The people who valued stability leaned in. And the man who once thought removing me would simplify his life had disappeared under the weight of his own avoidance. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned.